this subject tonight is going to be on integration, because it was, I told someone today about it, and they said, well, you got to be more specific than that, brother. You just can't say integration. You got to, promote it. Basically, what I'm saying is this: integration it's a mindset. Integration started during the time of, of course, the civil rights era, when they began to sign certain bills to take away the ability to disenfranchise to an extent black people in this country, when they began to let down the Jim Crow laws in this country. That's the aspect. That's one aspect of what people perceive as integration. The next level is this: when you have a group of people and they know that they are genetically inferior, the smartest thing for them to do is to find a means to intermingle with those that are superior and mix in with that group of people so that they can prolong their stay on this planet. You got to realize the Caucasoid, the European, is, or what you perceive as a white man, is at a minus birth rate, has been on a minus birth rate since his inception physically for the past 6,000 years, bottom line. And the only reason why, just taking it back to Egypt for just a second, the only reason why he still exists is because of mixing in with us, genetically. And because of course, tying into divine, when the Hyksos came into ancient Egypt, when they finally was able, because they were supposed to die off at certain points, Raobat, and they were supposed to die off at a certain point. But the problem is, once we let down the immigration laws, then they began to mix in with the stronger gene, us as the original black Africans of ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet, that prolonged their stay genetically on this planet. Okay? Fast forward to the 60s again. The thing is that once black people, it seems as if black people just don't understand what it means to let your guard down and get stepped on. When you integrate with an individual who's trying to kill you, and you see this, what makes you think they're going to stop their mentality? When we let go of, for example, businesses, our own black businesses, our own black cities, such as, of course, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, Black Wall Street, the sports leagues that we had, football, baseball, basketball, even hockey leagues. That was the start of integration. We began to integrate with the beast, and we let go of our finances. We let go of our black unity. We forgot who the enemy was. That was the start of our ending in terms of not needing him. See, we equated, as Tony Browder said, we equated integration with freedom. We felt as if we integrated with him, that he'll no longer kill our kids. We could be amongst their schools, because they had better schools than we did because the government was funding their schools. So automatically we felt like if we was allowed to go to their schools, we'd get better schools, as opposed to just saying, well, look, let's build up our own foundation, let's build up our own finances, let's build up our own schools so we won't ever need them. Because if you look at, going back to sports again, Jackie Robinson was just their way. After him was Larry Doby, but Jackie Robinson was their way of bringing in the black dollar into a white society, into, the whites' sports and everything, because they needed him, because they needed the black dollar. If you have more blacks into a situation, more than likely you're going to see more blacks come into it and invest economically. So they needed, that's the part that they don't really want to tell you. Like, look, we needed this nigga because we needed more niggas in our league to invest. Bottom line. Once they got the black dollars, then they were able to throw out the niggas as much as they possibly can to go back and make it into pretty much a white sports situation again, as they've done over the years. If you really watch, that's a point of integration. But when you're dealing with integration in terms of now, what it does is mentally it gives you a myth as if you're no longer enslaved and you're no longer being oppressed. You understand? Because people would say things like, well, we have the same opportunities as everyone else, and we clearly know that that's not true. Because let's say, for example, if everything is equal now because of integration, then whites would be being thrown in prisons as much as blacks and Latinos are, and we know that's not the case. So that's a spell, because it gave you the sense to make you think that someone is no longer oppressing you because you're quote unquote integrated with them now. But if I'm going into every major city in the United States, there's still integration going on. Houston, Texas is one of the largest forms of integration you have. You can see that through Bel Air, Texas, through Sugar Land, to West University, to parts of Katy. Very much integrated. Very much segregated, And that shows the myth and the belief system that they put a lot of blacks in. See, another portion or another aspect of integration was race mixing, because prior to 1964, prior to Willie Lynch and everything like that being let down, blacks, male and female, were being killed for just even being seen with someone of white race, especially the men. They were being killed large numbers just for walking with a white woman. They knew better, and they knew within themselves, if I did this, I would be killed. Whereas now they have this mindset that if I hang out, if I'm chilling with this white woman, nothing's going to happen to me. But yet you still have cases, even in Texas today, where men are still being killed for hanging out with white women, for still dating white women. So that gave you a perception of something. And perception most of the time is not even true. It's perception. So most blacks have a perception that everything is okay, whereas, for example, sports, you can say, for example, your football, you play whistle to whistle. So it's an even keel. Whites and blacks are on an even keel according to how they perceive it. But the moment you blow that whistle, blacks have to get back into their place, and whites can go back to being supreme in terms of status. So that is another myth. Blacks still fall for it. Because think about it like this. If you're completely integrated, again, why is it that if I take, and I've made this example before, you take the brother Richard Sherman, and he, when he showed his bravado and he showed his ego on TV, and he showed how he really felt about certain things, and he said it in front of the white world, all of a sudden he became all types of niggas and thugs. Whereas if that's a white man, all of a sudden he's just cocky and confident. Why is it a dichotomy in terms of, why is it an imbalancement in terms of perception if we're integrated? That would mean you're saying that we're all equal. We're all treated and created equal. So we're all in the same melting pot, but yet if that's the case, then how are you going to tell me that Trayvon Martin is equal, but yet he was killed for being in the wrong street in the wrong time? So he was shot in Florida based on an old sundown town law. It's you better be in your place type shit. That's the way they treated him. The same thing with Jordan Davis. His so-called the music was too loud, so the white man was allowed to shoot him because of being out of his place. If we're really integrated, why is all these incidences happening? That needs to be understood, that you're not integrated. What they did was they allowed you, because that's what integration really means this. All it is that blacks are allowed to buy from whites. If you really look at it from an honest perspective, blacks are allowed to buy from whites because they can make sure that if you try to get certain jobs, they can look at your application, they can look at your name, and they can discriminate against you to this day. They can't covertly say you're a nigga so you can't work here no more, but they can look at your application and X you right on out. Perfect example, if I have no felony record at all, but I could go for a job, white man with 3 felonies on his record, same age, can go get that same job. He'll get that job before I will. But you're saying integration is real. You're saying that integration destroyed what type of discrimination laws that Jim Crow put in place, but that still goes on to this day. When you look at situations with our kids, you know, they want the Jordans, they want the biggest shoe, that symbolizes integration, because mentally, if I buy and I spend X amount of money, $100, $150, $200 with this specific corporation, that what I'm doing is I'm buying into the system, because you want to be in the house. Integration means that you want to be in the house very badly. So you do whatever it takes in terms of getting in that house, even if it's investing all of your money into their society and not having any more economic power. Blacks could care less about economic power. They suck their teeth at economic power. That's the problem with integration that it did on the black mind and the black dollar is they would rather put in their money for frivolous things from cars, rims, weave, shoes. That's the perception of integration. If I buy all these things and I'm proverbially in the house, I'm back. I want to mentally. I want to still be a slave. I don't want to really get beaten, but I want to be treated. I want to get patted on top of the head by the slave master. So what I want to do is I'm going to invest all my dollars into their society. That is what suffers the black dollar, is the myth of integration. That is the problem. So that is what I mean by what is integration, and what did it do to blacks in terms of cripple their society. Blacks have no society, they have no culture. When you automatically, in terms of integration, when you integrate with a specific culture of people on a large number, you'll begin to take on their likeness and their culture. That's why you see so many blacks now starting to take on white culture, starting to take on white music, take on white likenesses, because we want to be like the European. We want to be like the beast. Because as long as I'm not like myself, because we were taught to hate ourselves since slavery. And you take it on down from slavery on into now, a lot of blacks feel that being 100% black is a problem. So what they do is they create these names of mixed, Creole, I'm something else, I'm really Puerto Rican, I'm really Spanish this, instead of calling yourself what you are, an African, because they still treat you like an African in this society, not being wanted, but you create all these different racial classifications for yourself because you're ashamed of who you are really. That is the huge problem. Integration created a confused perception of mind into our mindset, into our thought process, so that you no longer see the enemy for what he is and what he's doing to your race to this day covertly. You make up all the excuses in the world to still think that integration was a good thing for black folks. That's the reality. They can make you think that they had a problem with it, but once they realize that niggas gave up all their money and gave up everything for them, then they had no problem. Because if you take it historically speaking, whites consolidated at a certain point and created the white race because they did not want to be penetrated economically by blacks. So they created the white race and created they created that population imbalancement into the United States. Because if I just dealt with Anglo-Saxon, they would be the minority into the society. Honestly, if you didn't equate Irish, you didn't equate the Italian, you didn't equate the Polish, and you didn't equate the Jew, you only dealt with Anglo-Saxon, blacks would outnumber them because you're putting in mulattoes. So mulattoes would actually be considered to be black by genetically speaking, not 3/5 rule, but genetics. They would consider to be part of our race, but because they decided to consolidate, that took who would be considered to be mulattoes and made them into the white race, and I'm meaning in terms of the Italians and also a part of the Jews. So they were smart enough to create a race that made them become the superior in terms of population, and then made the African to be a minority in this country. It was a very slick move. But then over the years, blacks wanted to be a part of that race. Blacks wanted. The thing is also with integration, I'm just giving you factors. Blacks now see everything through the eyes of the European because of integration, because of being educated by that beast. Because you integrated and you are now allowed to go into his schools, you see history through his eyes. You see yourself through his eyes. If he called Africans savages and they made you change your perception of who you are from being an African to being whatever you want to call yourself, because most black people don't even want to call themselves black people no more. They don't want to call themselves Nubians or nothing. They're whatever they want to call them. They're other. They're completely confused by racial classification. If I can get you to do that, then I can get you to hate yourself on a very large level, and it's detrimental to that. And educational wise, I can get you to educate your kids in a confused manner, the same way I was confused in that same manner. So integration destroyed our culture, our economic base, and the way we perceive ourselves. There's nothing good that came out of integration except not being shot down and being hung from trees on large numbers. But we're not integrated at all. At all. We're not integrated by no freaking means. You cannot equate gentrification with integration. That's whites going back into ghettos that they used to live in and taking it back, economically speaking, because of white consolidation, then they come together and take back parts of the cities that they once lived in before white flight, which is what they're doing right now to this day, from Houston to even Brooklyn, New York. So all these things go into what happened in terms of integration. We wanted to no longer be beaten. We wanted to no longer be killed in large numbers. We submitted ourselves to that beast rather than get them to come to the table because of us coming together. If we would have came together and say, listen, we're not integrating with you. We're gonna join forces with the black guerrillas, with the young folks who's fighting against you, and you're gonna come to the table the same way the black Seminoles did to the white race during slavery. Our mindset began to change. We began to fear him because of what was going on with us. So we felt the need to be integrated with him, which was our downfall in this country, because now when you ask blacks about coming together economically, they give you a million excuses, and they wanna work for him so bad. You want to be a slave for him so bad. But when an African comes to a Negro and says, well, look, this is what we can do together to get our money right, all of a sudden we got a million excuses on why you can't do it. That's because of integration. It gave the Negro a big mental block in terms of independence spiritually and independence financially. And that is what we're dealing with in terms of integration to this day in our society, in terms of blacks in this country. Does anyone have any questions before I go any further, or statements?
Yeah, I actually did. I have a question. I'm confused. Who are the Black Seminoles?
Black Seminoles were a group of Native Americans who came together and were fighting to free blacks during slavery around 1835 to 1838. They were a Native American tribe of people, and they consisted of American Indians and blacks who were freed, who they were freeing during that time period. And they were considered to be the only successful slave rebellion in this country. You know, even though we deal with Nat Turner and we deal with Harriet Tubman, they were the only ones that really brought the Europeans to their knees. You follow?
Really
So they were the only ones. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, also the deacons of defense too. The deacons.
Okay.
I forgot what town they was in where they fought against the Klan, and they got tired of the lynches and things like that. So the deacons in the church that got together call themselves the deacons of defense.
Right.
I know what you're talking about. I actually seen a movie. The Duke actually made a movie with I think it was Brother Forrest Whitaker back on Showtime. Actually, it was a good piece of history, and a lot of people don't like to talk about them. You know, when it comes down to, you know, the Black Panthers, you know, both great sets, but nobody wants to talk about there was actually a good black self-defense group down here in the South, because you know how they always make it out to be. The South was just the main place of the white, Black Depression and everything else. But, you know, it's just, you know, nobody likes to talk about them.
Right. No, you're right. I'm glad you let the brother put that up in terms of the deacons of defense. I didn't know about that one. Thank you for that one.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have a chance, you go on YouTube. You know, probably looking up Deacons of Defense. There's a movie with Forrest Whitaker. Deep movie. Has a lot of history. You know, I don't know that much about them, but they have stood up against the Klan and other racial sets down there. And in the movie, they actually explained that they actually put a hand out to ask Martin Luther King to support him, but you already know Martin Luther King was always nonviolent. You know,
right.
or I guess that was the NAACP saying that, okay, we can't have too many violent groups out there. We already got the Black Panthers, so we can't have, these guys down here being too violent. So they was kind of renegade because they was really by themselves when you look at it. And we had a conversation last week. We already know the Black Panthers actually had people who was shooting back at the racial police men, but down there I heard the deacons were actually really shooting, at the KKK members. I don't know if they killed them or not, but it was actually true fighters.
Mm. Yeah, that's something. I'm glad you mentioned Dr. King. Dr. King is a very touchy subject in terms of integration. I think that when you look at different aspects of Dr. King, he at some point wised up and realized what was going on during, I would say, around the mid-'60s. He started realizing that economically, because towards the end, before he was assassinated, he started looking at the economic sense of where blacks was and realized what was going on and realized that that's a problem. There's recordings to show that, he was basically pointing out the economic disenfranchisement of black people since slavery and that was still going on, that whites were still benefiting from slavery. Even if it's in 1964, they were still benefiting from slavery. Young whites were still benefiting from slave labor because of investment from the banks and all these things. Because there's a lot of banks that had money into slave ships and into the plantations. But when you're dealing with Dr. King in terms of integration, a lot of blacks, they look at that. I think that they were very remorseful for a lot of blacks. They didn't want no one deaf. They didn't want anyone any more deaf to go on in terms of our race. But at some point, if you really look at the civil rights movement, the nonviolent protests and the holding hands, that's not what really brought whites to the table. That really wasn't. It was not, because whites will allow you to do that to an extent. But when it came down to the beginning of because I realized the Panthers really started in the early to mid '60s, and they came out full force. They came out as snipers, and they was killing whites. They just don't report that part of it, and that was going on in large numbers. And these were young black men that were doing these things to white men. And that was one of the key factors to bring white to the table in terms of, okay, let's go ahead and stop these situations going on with these hangings and things like that. Whites will allow you to hold hands all day and kumbaya and sign petitions, but that's not stopping anything. That really isn't stopping anything. So that's an aspect of integration. You're asking for something. You can't really be free from someone else's oppression if you're asking the oppressor to take you out of the oppression. they're still in control of your freedom. The only way you can really truly get freedom is if you take it yourself. So it's still under a myth of being allowed to do something, because that's, when you're dealing with the Klan today, the Klan can still go out and kill a black man right now and get away with it, and everyone can act like nothing ever happened. It goes on to this day. But they won't think that way if they have a threat to look over their shoulder to. If there's no defense coming, if I can beat you up all day if I know you're not going to fight back. Black people think, because of the mindset of integration, that if I beg and I plead for you to stop doing something, or I act passive enough, then you're going to stop. That's not balancement. That's submissiveness. And people usually don't submit to you equally while you're still asking for them to free you. It doesn't work like that. You have to fight for your freedom. And the mindset of an integrationist is to ask for it from the oppressor. I can't truly be free if I'm asking the person who's oppressing me to free me, because the reality of it is that person who is oppressing me is still in control of my freedom. And if I'm still passive, you got to realize something. You're naturally a balanced individual, agreeable, disagreeable, from 180, 180 to 360. You can't truly be balanced or be under the laws of Ma'at if you are all the way passive all the time. If you're not willing to fight for something, because that's what religion made you do. Religion made you passive to things. That's funny. You look at it like this. The first Muslims were conquerors. When you deal with Pale Arabs went and killed up the majority of the Ahlul Bayt, the Ali's through Ali's seed, and that's when they began to establish Sunni Islam. That's aggression. When you deal with the first Christians, you're dealing with. We go back to the Romans, and then you go further into the Crusades. They were the Christians and Muslims, in terms of historically speaking, were European, but they were aggressors. But you had to fight that off. We fought off colonialism, until we finally were completely conquered. But you can't truly call yourself an African if you're passive, if you're accepting something happening to you on a physical level. I can't fight the oppressor by trying to chant him away. I need to chant, but at the same time, I need to physically defend myself. I can't truly call myself what I want to call myself if I'm accepting the abuse consistently. It doesn't work like that. Someone's not going to take the foot off of your neck if you are begging for them to take it off. All they're going to do is press harder and harder until they kill you. And that is another mindset of integrationists. You want to beg him to take it off, but in reality, it doesn't work like that. It will never work like that. You will never be free on that level. I can't be free like that. I have to be the one to fight for it. But blacks don't want to fight because they don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to ruffle any white people's feathers. So what they do is they find any means to be an Uncle Tom or be the bed wench of the situation. Bottom line, male and female. That's reality. And we're dealing with that on a larger scale now because they really don't want to truly be free. A lot of the Negro mindset is to not be free and to intermingle with the white race. Bottom line, to intermingle with the oppressor who is the European. That's what integration truly means now. On every level, I don't want to really be free because then that means I have to truly do for self, which is what most black leaders wanted us to do. But we want to revert back to Dr. King all day. But Dr. King was like, look, we want our money. You made all that money off of our African backs, and we want our check. Because he said in a lecture, we need to, when we go to D.C., we're going to ask for our money. That's revolutionary. That's not no integrationist. At a certain point, he changed a lot. He evolved as a black leader. But we don't want to pay attention to that aspect because they don't allow us to. they still take us back to the I Have a Dream speech that one day all whites and blacks are going to intermingle and babies and black babies and white babies are going to come together and we can do this together, we can do that together, which is a myth, because all they did was, on a genetic level, take genetics from the superior race, which is the African, and bring it into the inferior race, which is the whites. That's their means. So now what they did was, okay, we have genetically, to a point, bred them out. We don't need them now anymore, so now let's create genocide to kill them off. And so because, again, of integration, you don't see that going on a larger number. You don't see mass incarcerations. You'll make excuses for mass incarcerations. You don't see them creating different diseases and vaccinations to kill off our babies. You don't see the fact that homosexuality creates a minus birth rate for your whole race of people. You make excuses for it. That's the integrationist mindset. That's a disease mindset. Instead of separating and getting your race together, you want to sit here and say that's racism. But the white race finds many different ways to separate himself from you and find many ways to kill you off. That's the Negro. He wants to integrate. He wants everything to be all happy-go-lucky. He wants his white wife somewhere, and he wants to have his kids worship white people. That's the integrationist. That's the American Negro, and that's the death of the black race or the African race, or the black African. That will be the detriment, because the more you're around that type of people, the more you begin to think it's okay to think that way. That's not going to work. If we're going to try to get ourselves together, asking, again, the oppressor for your freedom is not going to get you that freedom 100%. They'll always be in control of it. And how do you know that they're in control of it? Because if they can give you the Civil Rights Act and allow you to vote, and they can amend certain parts of it like they've done a couple of years ago, then, of course, they're still in control of you. It's reality. And if people don't like it, tough. But you have to get your mouth off of the tit. And that is crippling you, because you are accepting what's going on to you right now. The first thing you want to do is pray it away or chant it away. And you cannot do any of those things, because if you want to be a Christian all day and realize faith without works is dead, I'm not going to pray and chant with any person who is not going to do any other work other than praying and chanting. That means all you want to do is get on your knees. So you're still a slave.